All right, everybody. I have been practicing with my new camera to try to get a good video for you. I'm in the studio. It's very echoey in here all the time. But I want to just do a little soldering review. Some of my mentorship students have asked to just kind of review some of the things that we've learned. And one of the things that we've learned is soldering. So in this example, we have a teardrop shape, and our solder seam is right here on the edge of where our teardrop comes together to a point right here. So I'm going to open that up for you so you can see what I'm talking about. So let's see, you're able to see right there. Right there is our intersection where our solder seam is going to go. And what we want there is a really good fit. So when we're soldering, there are 5 things that we talk about. One of them is having a good fit, which means that when those edges come together, and I'm always putting my fists together, when those edges come together, you don't want there to be any gaps. Okay, so you want both of the lines to touch really nicely, to meet really closely here. So what I've done is filed this side at an angle so that when those intersections come together, and I'm going to zoom in for a second so you can see what I mean. So on this one, let's see if I can get it to focus a little bit better. Not terribly well, but so right here where that intersection comes together, right there, I want that one to be sort of at a little angle so that when it nests up against the other edge, that is really snug little fit right there. So once we get that fit correct, we can set it up to solder. And for soldering, we need a fireproof block of some sort. So this is a charcoal block. Underneath it are solderite boards. I'm going to zoom back out again here. There we go. And so we have solderite boards underneath here. That's what this surface is. I have a soldering pick in my hand. That's what this is. I have some metal tongs that I can move my piece with after I've soldered it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little flux. So the 5 things. So, and we need the good fit. We need to be clean. And when we filed our edges, we cleaned them. We need to have flux, solder, and heat. So with our flux, we use Handy Flux. I get it from Rio Grande, and it's kind of a pasty looking stuff. It's this white pasty stuff. And we're going to use our paintbrush and just pick up some of the chunky parts of it. We don't want to like a ton of liquid because we want to get some substance on there, but I'm going to paint that right on the seam and on both seams. And then I'm going to use some hard solder, if I can find some hard solder. And I've got that cut into little pallions, and I'm going to just pick up a pallion with my brush. There's a little chip of silver on the end there, and I'm going to paint that chip right into that intersection. And hopefully, ideally, I have another chip of silver in here. But since I don't, I'm going to show you how I cut them up. So I keep in my drawer some hard solder, and when I am pulling it out, I always clean it with a little bit of sandpaper just to make sure that it doesn't have any tarnish built up or any dirt or oils, because remember, we want things to be clear. So here's my hard solder. Yeah, everything gets backwards in this reflection that I'm looking at, but I'm just going to clean it a little bit with a little piece of sandpaper, and then I'm going to cut it into little chips. And so here's my container. That all that crusty stuff that's in there is actually just flux that gets accumulated in there from my paintbrush when I pick up the chips. But the size of the chip that I'm cutting is really just about a 2 millimeter, 1 to 2 millimeter chips, because you want to use the smallest amount of solder that you can to get the job done. So I've cut a few pieces there. I'm just going to, depending on how long you're going to be working, I'm at the end of my studio day here, so I'm going to just put a little bit more flux on my brush. I need to have flux on my solder chip, and I need to have flux on my piece. We already put it on our piece, so I'm going to grab a little solder chip and get it right there on the intersection so that it's nice and set on there. So it doesn't really matter how you position it as long as it's touching the seam. So it can lay in different directions, but it has to be touching that seam so that when the solder flows, it will flow into the seam. Okay, so we want to have our solder positioned properly. Next, I'm going to use a butane torch. I'm going to zoom out for a minute so that you can see this torch and how it works. So it's just a little handheld creme brulee torch. It's perfect for this size. If you look at my hand, this is not like a huge piece that we're working on. It's probably about 1 inch long and about 1/2 inch wide. And it's a thin metal, it's bronze. So this type of torch can get the job done very easily. And it's a butane torch. The butane canisters fill it up. And to light it, what we're gonna do, there's a little safety latch that we pull down with our thumb right here, and just pull it down. And then you hit the ignition button until you get a flame. And sometimes you have to do that a couple times. Once you get the flame, then you're gonna hold the side button, which is your hold button. Then you can let go with your thumb, let go of the hold button, and there you have your torch working. I'm gonna put my solder pick in the other hand, and I'm gonna zoom back in for you guys so you can kind of see better what's going on here. And what I'm gonna do right now is I'm just sort of gradually heating the piece that's on my left-hand side, and maybe reverse for you, but I'm getting it nice and hot. The metal's starting to change colors. That flux is gonna start to burn off. And what we're going to do then when it starts to burn off is we can come in and focus our heat a little bit more on that seam. I've got it dark in here so that you guys can see a little bit better what's going on, I'm hoping. So we heat the whole thing, and we don't want to just bring our torch in and heat just the piece of solder. We want that metal to get hot enough for the solder to flow. So we have to keep the whole thing hot. And if we just focus our heat in one area, the rest of the metal is going to pull that heat away. So we have to keep heating the whole metal, focusing a little bit on that intersection there where our solder is. It's hard for me to see here today because I have the lights out for you. This charcoal block is not my preferred block. I usually just use the solderite boards, and I'm finding that it's taking me longer when I'm using these charcoal blocks to get my solder to flow for some reason. Come on, buddy. Oh boy. All right. So I'm gonna move on to the other piece, and I'm actually gonna take it down. I thought it might be easier for you to see on the black, but I really don't enjoy using those. So I'm gonna just bring it right down here to the board and work on it here. I'm gonna zoom in for you a little bit more. You know what's happening? There it is. My torch is dying. That's why I wasn't able to get enough heat. I don't have enough butane in there, so I'm gonna switch torches. I could tell because my flame was getting really small, so that's what my flame should look like, big, not that little tiny flame that I just had. So I'm gonna do this one. I'm gonna go back up to that other one when I'm done. Here we go. I think you can get a good view there. So there's my piece of solder on the edge. That's what it should be doing. Okay, we're gonna heat it up. It's getting right close to the melting temperature, keeping everything hot. It's gonna flow in just a second. And there it goes. Okay, so you just see a little flash of silver. I'm gonna come back up to this other one and see if it still has enough flux left on it, but I don't think so, because remember how I said it has to be clean? It's all black and crusty now, so that one's gonna have to be, it's a good example of what happens when things go wrong though. So because it didn't flow and it's all black and crusty and most of the flux has burned off, I'm gonna pickle this and set it back up again and do it over. And that's all that you have to do when that happens. It's no big deal. It's not the end of the world. Here it is. I just showed you it's all black and crusty. There's a little bit of flux left in there and maybe it would work, but I have a better chance if I clean all the fire scale off, set it back up again, and redo it. Okay, this is what we were looking for. We want a nice clean seam. Everything looks good on there. That's what we want. So that one's going, they're both going into the quenching pot, which is just water. And then they can go right into the pickle to eat off that fire scale. But that's just kind of a basic solder. We do lots of soldering classes here in the studio. At the moment we're on pause because of everything that's going on in the world, but we hope to be having classes back up again and running soon, and hope you'll come down and join us for a class. All right, thank you.